Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Comics Lair. I'm your host, Nancy Northcott. The Comics Lair is sponsored by Heroes Aren't Hard to Find and Heroes Convention. This panel will discuss our favorite superhero teams. But before we start that, I'd like to go around and ask everyone to tell us a little about themselves and how they got interested in comics. Chris, will you start?
I'm Chris Cavett. I'm pretty unique on these panels in that I'm not a writer, or at least not professionally. I do write as an amateur for Interlac, the amateur press alliance devoted to the Legion of Superheroes. I've been a comic fan since I was about 8 or 9 years old. Like a lot of people, I started with Richie Rich and Archie comics, and then graduated into superhero comics. I preferred DC because they tended to be all contained within one issue, with the unreliable distribution back in those days before the direct market. I was suspicious of Marvel's. The stories were always continued, and I never knew if I'd be able to find the next issue or not.
Okay, John.
Hey, my name is John L. French, retired CSI, 35 years plus on the streets of Baltimore. I'm a writer, and I became interested in comics, all kinds, when I was a boy. I fell away from it for a while and was drawn back by Batman: The Dark Knight. And that was the first step on a very slippery slope that has me going to my comic book store every Wednesday now.
Okay, Fraser?
I'm Fraser Sherman. My first comic book when I was 6 years old was Justice League of America 30, second half of the second Justice League Justice Society team-up. I was instantly hooked. It was so much cooler than anything that happened in the little village in England where I lived. And I have never stopped reading comic books. In some periods, I mostly read old ones of mine. But at the moment, there's the DC app. There's the excellent Durham Library. So I'm reading more than I have in a long time.
Emily?
I'm Emily Leverett. I'm an author. I write fantasy. I'm also a medievalist. Actually, I started reading comics when I was in junior high. But I read horror comics. I read like the Tales from the Crypt, and there were a couple others. And then I kind of fell away from them and came back to them through a friend of mine getting me into Sandman. And then my now husband escorting me gently into the rest of things. And so a lot of what I read is stuff that he picks up and then hands to me and says, you have to read this because I've got a huge to be read pile of all sorts of stuff. And so those move it to the top of the list.
And those of you who are here regularly know that I'm Nancy Northcott, as I said, and that I write historical fantasy for Falstaff Books and independently publish several different kinds of romance and one series of science fiction. I got into comics when I was 8, and my first issue was Jimmy Olsen. It was a Phantom Zone story with Elastic Lad. And if that sounds weird to you, it was. I didn't realize how weird it was as a child. I thought it was incredibly cool. Yeah. And Mon-El was in it, and I became a longtime fan of Mon-El. And picking up on what Chris mentioned about uneven distribution, we did record a panel for ConTinual called From Spinner Racks to Direct Sales. And so if you look it up on the ConTinual Facebook page, that you can find that and listen to it. And that ends the shameless plug. So since we're here to talk about our favorite superhero teams, let's just dive right into that. Let's focus on one team. And after we exhaust that team, then we'll go around and say another one, because I can't imagine all of us have just one favorite, even though there might be one that we like more than the others. John, will you start?
My favorite all-time superhero team is the Justice Society of America. They were the first, and Justice League, forgive me, they actually have cooler heroes. They have the original Atom. They have Alan Scott on occasion. They have Johnny Thunder, who never really knew how to bring up the genie, but he always managed. to do it accidentally. And it was like a nice rotating cast, and they got along a lot better than most, so even though at the original at the beginning they did have Wonder Woman as their secretary, but that was quickly solved. And even now, they continue to be a really cool team.
Okay, Fraser?
For me, Justice. Oh, do I respond to Justice Society, or I just name a team?
Just name a team for now, please.
Justice League. Like I said, it was the first superheroes of anything I encountered. I knew absolutely nothing. I did not realize they had secret identities because they didn't put them on in that story. I assumed they just sat around in costume the whole time. But it was still fascinating, and there's just something about them, the lineup of the top heroes, whether they're in the old secret sanctuary in a mountaintop, or the satellite sanctuary, or the watchtower. There have been errors where I didn't particularly care for the writing or the setup, but the platonic ideal of the Justice League always wins me over. It's my number one team, definitely.
Okay, Emily?
Mine actually is going to be comparatively, I think, recent. I just went back and reread The Young Avengers from about 10 years ago, Kieran Gillen's, just because it's delightful and interesting, and Kid Loki, and it's got Kate Bishop, and it's also just crazy pants, like what happens and how it functions. It's also incredibly LGBTQ friendly. The main characters are an adorable pair of boys that are just delightful. But beyond that, it also is a super interesting story, and just a very different sort of way to look at what young people are going through, like the perspective of a 17, 18, 19-year-old comic hero, superhero, as opposed to someone a little older than that.
Okay, Chris?
Well, I think being active in APPAs based on both sides of the Atlantic, devoted to the Legion of Superheroes, that I might be in trouble with my friends if I said anything other than the Legion. But I really have loved them from the moment I read my first stories, and just there's so many heroes, there's time travel, there's all the different planets that the different heroes are from. It really captured my imagination when I was a child, and it's just such a rich universe. So many different types of stories have been told with them, and I think they're a solid choice for my number one.
Well, breaking the trend toward variety, they're my number one too. The Legion was the first super team I ever read, and I fell in love with it the first time I picked up an issue. And so it's the Legion for me for all the reasons that Chris named. So everybody gave us a little bit of the reasons why they like this particular team. Do you have a favorite character? And if so, who is it? Fraser, will you start?
In the Justice League, I like most of them because they are the top lineup. I am not sure I could pick one character out of the many long years it has run really stands out as, yes, that is a definitive Liga to me. There are many good ones, and of course a lot depends on how they're being written, so no, I got nothing for this one.
Okay, Emily?
Out of them all, I think I like Miss America, and she's very no nonsense and very always, she always punches Kid Loki, who's way complicated and not actually Kid Loki, in the face, which is delightful. Just as soon as he gets to that edge of, he's just taken it a half a step too far, and she just whacks him, and she has sort of the most common sense and most maturity in some of the best lines, especially in that particular arc.
Chris?
Not my favorite comics hero, but my favorite hero in my favorite team, the Legion, would be Duo Damsel. She's pretty much the girl next door. And what really seals this for me is that first Mordru story in Adventure Comics. And that's that scene where she's crawling through that tunnel when the Legion have gone back in time and they're hiding in Smallville, and she's being so sad about her unrequited love for Superboy. And it just made her seem so real and so sympathetic. And we've all felt that unrequited love at some point in our lives. And just Duo Damsel's always been special to me, just from that connection that I felt to her the first time I read that story, and every time I've read it since.
Okay. John?
Hey, when you asked who our favorite team character was, I thought of saying the first name that popped into my mind was Jay Garrick, the original Flash. He was always the voice of reason. He was the one everybody turned to when there was a problem, as if to say, what do we do now? He was the one who kind of kept things going. I remember, and if I'm wrong, please forgive me, in a later incarnation of the Justice Society of America, when back then he was Captain Marvel, who was really Billy Batson, was getting more than friendly with Stargirl. They kind of decided that, this was, he's a grown man. They didn't know about Billy Batson. He's a teenager. Something needs to be said. And Jay Garrick was the one who got to say it. And he did it very well, sort of like a friendly uncle. He's, even the other Flashes, even though they realized he may not be the fastest, he's the one to go to if you have a problem. And so, Jay Garrick will always be there. The Shade, more or less, the Shade respected as much as he bedeviled Jay Garrick. The Shade respected Jay Garrick.
Okay. Well, my favorite Legion character for a long time was Phantom Girl. There was just something about her ability to move through objects that I thought was really cool. And she was so loyal to Ultra Boy, even when he got into trouble, as his hot-headed temperament tends to lead to. But as I grew older, I began to appreciate Saturn Girl more. And she's my favorite Legionnaire now because she's steady in a crisis. She's smart. Lots of Legionnaires are smart. It's not everybody's Brainiac 5, but nobody in the Legion is unable to think up a good solution. But she caught a lot of flack in the first Legion story I read, The Stolen Superpowers, because she was trying to save everybody's life because they'd gotten a message from Naltor's, a planet of Foreseers, saying that one Legionnaire would die in battle against Zaryan the Conqueror. And she decided that she was going to protect all the rest of them. And so she rigged a Legion leader election, kicked them all out of the Legion, and was about to go off to meet Zaryan when Mon-El, who was at that time a ghost in the Phantom Zone, told Lightning Lad what she was doing, and he went off after her. And the prophecy was correct. Lightning Lad died against Zaryan the Conqueror. So only when I was older did I really appreciate the stones it took to do that. And so now she's my favorite Legionnaire, head and shoulders. But if you have a favorite character and you have a favorite team, what are a couple of your favorite stories? Emily, will you start?
Like the one that I've been spending the most time with lately, so it's the one that's in the front of my mind, is this Young Avengers run by Gillen. And I think my favorite bit of the story is actually the very end, watching them sort of resolve everything that's happened and kind of come to grips with who they are and what they're doing and what they've been through. In particular, there is a great moment where like Loki falls apart and is like, this is all my fault, and I'm so
Oops.
Uh-oh.
She mentioned Loki, and look what happened.
Yeah.
She
Emily, I
invoked,
don't know if you can hear me, but you're
she
frozen.
invoked a bad trick.
Yep. Now am I unfrozen?
You're unfrozen
Yes.
now, so pick up with
Yeah.
Loki, if you would.
So
Excuse me.
everything is, of course, Loki's fault, but he finally manages to come out and say it and admit that he's not the Loki they thought he was, and all of this sort of stuff kind of comes pouring out. And then, like, later on, when it's all fixed, you get the impression that he both has and hasn't learned anything. There's a great line where he says, "I'm a story." And that just always struck me as like, yeah, he is, right? Like, there are characters that are characters, and then there are characters that are stories in themselves. Like, if you just say Loki, it doesn't matter. It can even be the strange alligator Loki in the TV show. There's a whole thing around that I think is a great way to get a hold of what comics can do, right? That all of these comics that we're talking about have such long histories of these characters that often come up again and again and again and are slightly different or aren't. So it's just that moment where sort of Loki is faced with the past and the future and who he is and stuff that I think is my favorite moment in that arc.
Yeah. Chris?
Well, I'll briefly mention again that first two-part Mordru story in Adventure Comics by Jim Shooter, but I think I'll go with what Fraser said was his first comic. I love that that two-part second JLA JSA team up that introduced Earth 3 and the Crime Syndicate. And again, for a little kid, that was just mind-blowing. The JSA was fairly mind-blowing. Oh, there's another Earth where there are other versions of these heroes, and then there's a third Earth, and there are third versions of these characters, and they're the bad guys on their Earth. It's just amazing. I first read that two-part story when it was reprinted in a 100-page super spectacular. I think it was Justice League number 114, is that right? Somewhere around there. And anyway, it's one of those stories that I just kept reading and rereading. The next day I'd read it again, and the next day I'd read it again. I could just never get enough of it, and I still love that story today.
Okay. John?
Hey, Fraser could probably tell me. I can't remember what the name of the comic was, but it was basically the return of the JSA. It was the story arc that introduced Huntress and Power Girl and the Star Spangled Kid, and it just brought everybody back, and it was just so much fun to read. I always enjoyed the JLA JSA crossovers, but they were sort of out of just a little bit off kilter for me. I really liked when they brought back JSA all the way when it was absorbed by Adventure Comics and ended with why the JSA disbanded in the first place. So I just like the whole run was basically one long story that reestablished the JSA.
Fraser?
And then, of course,
I'm sorry, John. I
Crisis.
didn't mean to cut you.
I said, and then, of course, came Crisis, and we know what happened with that.
Yes.
Yeah. Fraser?
In answer to John's question, it was All Star Comics. They revived it in '76 to give the JSA a new home. It's tough because picking one Justice League story out of decades, I will arbitrarily pick one. It was JLA 34 or 35, Deadly Dreams of Dr. Destiny. Dr. Destiny first shows up as a criminal scientist plotting to take over the world. In his second story, he's in prison, but he figures out a way to bring dreams to life. In comic books, you can make anything in the prison workshop. So he has made a device that brings dreams to life, like the JLA dreaming of more powerful versions of themselves. Oh, now they're real and they're evil. This time he has figured out how to imagine the device in his dream and make it have the same effect. So first, he plunges a JLA into a series of fights in their dreams. Superman is finding, but he's handicapped. He's immune to kryptonite, but he's vulnerable to yellow light Green Lantern. Atom has telescopic vision, but he can't turn it off, so he can't see anything that's close to him. Batman has super speed, but he doesn't know how to control it. Then they wake up, well, they beat the menaces in their dreams, then the same things happen all over again, and they get the same freak conditions, but Destiny has rigged the game, so this time they'll use the method they started in the dream, and it won't work, and then he figures he'll get them dead. Of course, they win, but it's a typical example of Gardner Fox's ability to do a really clever plot.
Well, it's hard for me to pick a favorite story arc because the Great Darkness saga, which was written by Paul Levitz, and I think, was that Keith Giffen art, Chris?
Yeah.
Fraser, thank you. That's kind of the landmark that everybody points to. And it's a wonderful story. It's a multi-parter. It's very involved. It's beautifully written. But I'm an old fart fan. And so I have a certain sympathy for the stories I read when I was much younger. And if I had to pick a favorite, it would probably be One of Us is a Traitor, which is the two-parter written by Jim Shooter, who was like a teenager himself at the time, and he was writing for DC, in which new members joined the Legion of Superheroes. And they were Karate Kid, Princess Projectra, Nemesis Kid, whose superpower was that he could adapt to whatever he needed to face any opponent. He would have it. And was it just the three of them?
And Princess Projectra.
Yes, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And they quickly realized that somebody was sabotaging the Legion, and they figured it had to be one of the newbies. And it was brilliantly written with great misdirection. Very simple, the pattern. It was the old 6 panels per page layout, and not that complicated a story, but it was a good enough mystery that you looked at it and you really didn't know who the traitor was until the very end of the story. Or it would be, and I can't remember the title of the two-parter. It was the one that introduced the Fatal Five and the Sun Eater.
Oh, yes.
And at the end of the story, somebody has to die to save the galaxy. And I think that's why I put it behind the other one, because, Legionnaire died. I don't like Legionnaires die. So I would pick one of those. So to wind up this first round, though, if you were going to recommend one story to somebody to get into your favorite team, what story would you recommend? Chris, I think we're back to you.
What story would I recommend to get into the Legion? I think I'm back again to talking about that first Mordru two-parter in Adventure Comics, written by Jim Shooter. I think it was illustrated by Kurt Swan. Because it doesn't. One thing that people say they struggle with the Legion is, there are so many characters, but that story had a pretty small subset of the Legion it focused on, and a good part of the story took place in the 20th century in Smallville, which makes it a little bit more familiar to us than the future. So it's a wonderful story, but it also, I think, is not overwhelming for someone who's not familiar with the Legion.
John?
Okay, I would recommend, actually, my recommendation is not for a Justice Society of America book, but rather the intermittent story arc that begins with Flash of Two Worlds, where Barry Allen discovers what becomes designated as Earth 2, and he keeps going back to Earth and gradually meets the members of the JSA. He meets Dr. Midnight. He meets Dr. Fate. He meets a lot of the characters who are just now, because of his presence, are coming out of retirement. And so what you're seeing is the first which basically what amounts to the first reformation of the Justice Society, and we learn about them as Barry Allen learns about them.
Fraser?
What was that story? Oh, sorry. Vengeance of the Immortal. Vengeance of the Immortal Villain. Yeah.
And that's the Flash of Two Worlds arc, right?
Yeah.
Am I understanding?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
It wasn't a continual arc. It was just sort of like every once in a while, Barry Allen would wind up in Earth 2, and he would learn a little bit, and he and us would learn a little bit more about this what for most readers was a strange new world.
Okay. Fraser?
I would pick, with a mind that Silver Age comics are an acquired taste to a lot of people who didn't grow up with them, either Steve Englehart's run, which was about 12 issues in the 70s, because Englehart's pacing and his style and his characterization are a little more in tune with modern tastes, and it was a very good run, or Mark Waid's JLA Year One, which was a 12-issue series, late 1990s. It was set at a time when the premise was that a lot of the B teams like Doom Patrol, Challengers of the Unknown, Black Hawks of the Silver Age had been around before the JLA, and they're a little resentful of the new kids on the block, and the JLA's having to prove themselves and learning to work together. And it shows them from the start, right after they've beaten the aliens they did in their first fight, to the point where they are proving, yes, we are the A-list team, and we do have what it takes to protect this planet. Continuity-wise, it has been erased by God knows how many retcons since, mutter, but it is a really good yarn by Mark Waid, and I think that is the one I would pick.
Okay. Emily?
I would just say start with number 1 for the Young Avengers, because it's a new iteration of them. Style over substance is the name of the issue, but because it does a good job of introducing them as characters you may know, characters you may not know, and it also does a good job of kind of chucking you into the deep end and letting you catch up, which I do like. Like I don't think I can face another, say, Batman movie where I have to watch his parents die, right? Can you just throw me in and we'll skip that? And so I like that it's expecting you to know some stuff, and if you don't, it's well enough written that you can put it together. If you don't have Google, right? Like, because you can always find all of these if you really want to know. But yeah, just episode 1, or I guess book 1, issue 1.
I totally agree with you about retelling superhero origins. I mean, they've had their origins done so many times. Could we just jump into an adventure, please? Maybe for a change. I've been sitting here listening to everybody. I mean, the advantage of being the moderator is you can go last. And so I've been trying to think, what story would I recommend for people to jump into the Legion? I love the story that Chris mentioned, the Mordru the Merciless story. And I liked, because it was set in Smallville, Pete Ross and Lana Lang played interesting roles in it. And I mean, Pete's just vanished, and pretty much so has Lana. And I liked that it used magic. Yeah, John, did you want to say something?
Just an aside, Lana Lang comes back in Steelworks number 1.
Good to know. Thank you. And a lot of people online recommend the Great Darkness Saga. I think the Great Darkness Saga may be too much of a sprawling story with too many of all those characters mixed into it to be really easy for a new reader to fall into. So I think probably I would go with the Fatal Five story, because it's a small group of Legionnaires, the stakes are high, and the ending of the story really exemplifies what the Legion has always stood for. It's kind of a callback to the Stolen Superpowers in a way. So that's the one I would pick. And so we've used roughly half our time, and we've each done one team. So let's go around and pick another team. John, what's your second favorite team?
Well, my second favorite team would be Justice League in most of its incarnations, but since we've already talked about that, I always liked the original Birds, not the current incarnations, which seems to have just become yet another team book. I liked I liked it from the start when it was just Oracle and Black Canary, and I liked how the team grew seemingly naturally to pick up other bird-oriented, bird-themed heroes, and it was a process. The team building was a process rather than what seems to be going on now, which is let's do a team book and throw in name it after a old team and throw in random heroes and try to make them work, and they never do. I think.
Excuse me, I just wanted to ask you: are you referring to the new team that's been announced that's not out yet?
That would be one of them, but there are other teams other team books that just, for instance, some of the outsider incarnations just seem to be, well, we're going to revive this and we're going to throw in heroes that don't really seem to fit together. It's just we're popular and who do we want to be popular? Right. As an aside, I don't see why Harley Quinn has to be in everything. I liked the original Birds of Prey, where, like I said, it started as a 2-character book and eventually became a team.
Okay, Fraser?
I think, my second favorite, Silver Age Doom Patrol. No objection to Grant Morrison's brilliant reimagining in the 80s, but Arnold Drake, who was with Bruno Premiani, was the co-creator of the team. He was the only DC Silver Age writer who could do Marvel-style writing and make it work. The snappy dialogue, the intense emotional conflicts, and while he was not up to the level of Fantastic Four or Spider-Man, I think his work was way better than X-Men or Daredevil. Plus, I was getting the good stuff that Marvel did, only it was in DC, and I've always been a DC kid, so that worked out great. I also think Beast Boy, when he first showed up, later Changing of the Titans, and then later Beast Boy of the Titans, he was a very obnoxious, very mouthy kid, and I was a very good boy, and I think I'd like to be obnoxious and mouthy like him, but I can't. Plus, they were, although nobody used the term back then, they were very much a found family. And I think at some level I liked that. So I would say Silver Age Doom Patrol.
Hey, Emily?
So these are all based on comic books, but one thing that it sort of really highlights comics and culture at a moment was actually the 1993-94 X-Men cartoon. Like, if I had to send people in a direction, like, I would send them in that direction, because it fairly recently was watchable again and I went back to it. But I also just remember being so fascinated, in part because I wasn't reading comic books at the time, and here were all of these women that were doing things. And the men were kind of like, I have sharp, stabby fingernails, and if I lift my glasses up, I blow stuff up. And woman's like, I can control all the weather, and I can do this. And Jubilee could make sparkles, but that's fine. Okay, she could make sparkles. There was just something about that now it situates in my brain as something that is sort of quintessentially 90s. That was, for the moment, quite edgy in its own way. Right? Like, all of these people are deeply messed up. And unlike, say, a lot of other cartoons or sitcoms, nothing really gets fixed at the end. Like, things are temporarily fixed. They're a little sort of grander. So not only was it sort of, I think, an interesting entrance for certain kinds of comic books, but an interesting sort of move towards thinking about animation, because it also had a sort of vaguely anime style that was very different than so much of the other stuff. Because, I mean, I had been watching other afternoon cartoons that were not the X-Men, and it also weirdly carried on some of the stuff that I'd watched as a younger kid in a more adult way. So I think, like, giving that X-Men series a watch might be worth it for a lot of people who are wondering about where the heck sort of the modern stuff came from.
Okay, Chris?
I'm tempted to say the Justice League or Justice Society. We've talked about them a lot. I'm going to bring up a team no one has mentioned yet, the Teen Titans. Um, I I loved them when I was a child. They weren't being published at the time I discovered comics. It was in between when the Silver Age series had been canceled and before they started it back up in the Bronze Age. But my father bought a bunch of issues for me at a garage sale, and I just loved them. And they were bizarre. These are the issues with Narc and Lilith, and where they threw their costumes away and started following Mr. Jupiter around. And when I look back, no, the stories are interesting, but when I look back, I think I love the idea of that team more than the actual stories. I mean, Bob Haney just wasn't, I don't know, what doesn't really appeal to modern tastes, I think. And I wish they'd been handled better. I love the revival, the Wolfman Perez revival that came when it came out as much as everyone else did. Unfortunately, I read people writing about it and pointing out all the similarities to the new X-Men revival. And now that's all I can see. You know how that is when you don't see something and then someone tells you about it and it's all you can see. So now I read those stories. I still love the Perez art, but they don't hold up well for me. But just that idea of the Teen Titans, I just love. And and Emily, I think I read somewhere that Disney Plus is going to be releasing new episodes of that X-Men cartoon you were talking about.
We'll hope they don't mess it up. They may not. Like, sometimes they're very good about here's someone who knows how to do something. Go do it. But I mean, there's also the chance that we'll end up with a Wolverine Disney princess, which has its ups and downs. Nylons would be hard for him.
Chris, did you want to add anything else, or are you done?
I'm done.
Okay.
Thanks.
Well, Chris and John took the two I was weighing as my alternates. I first read the Teen Titans in the Silver Age, and those stories are really very dated. There's lots of 60s and 70s slang. Ding Dong Daddy was one of their villains. There was the Mad Mod, who was all Carnaby Street. You say Carnaby Street in 1970 and people know exactly what you mean. You say it now and people are like, what? There was one based on the Wolfman, and that might have been Ding Dong Daddy. I'm not sure. Anyway, they were very, very dated stories. And then when the Wolfman Perez came out, I was fortunate not to see what Chris saw. Because what I was focused on was the dynamics of the characters. And I thought they did probably the best job that's ever been done with that, with the Titans. And I don't think anybody has really matched that sense, which is why there's a Titans book and it runs for a while and then it vanishes and rinse and repeat. But Birds of Prey, I love that Oracle was the center of it. I love the whole buildup that she got, starting with Suicide Squad. And I think it's the Batman Chronicles Year 5 is the John Ostrander and Kim Yale origin story for Oracle, which is a wonderful character study. And I liked the female solidarity in a time when there were not a lot of female groups and not a lot of female bonding. The Birds of Prey had that, and they also went out and kicked ass. I mean, what's not to like about all that? And I really agree with John. You can't stick one member of the Birds of Prey on a team, gather some other random people who have nothing in common and say, now they're the Birds of Prey. I mean, I'm glad to see Cassandra Cain getting a shot. I really hope they undo what was apparently done to her in that movie that I didn't watch because, no offense to Harley fans, she gets on my last nerve. And so Harley, as the founder of the Birds of Prey, just doesn't work for me. If it works for you, more power to you. But so those would be my two favorite alternate teams. And so now that John and Chris have talked about them, I don't have to say much. Fraser, well, I already had said much. I realize that. But Fraser, go ahead.
I was going to say, this is what you said about you can't just stick a member of the Birds of Prey. This is something comic books have done a lot in recent years with okay, this is now the Outsiders. This is now Alpha Flight. The team, they're not Canadian, they're Earth Space Guardians, and does not work for me.
Yeah.
No, I think the team has, well, there were some that were created as a team. Like, for instance, Justice Society was an excuse to bring these people together and basically trade and exchange stories. Justice League started out as a team book, but there were ones, for instance, like Young Justice just started out as three guys hanging around and having adventures, and gradually became a team book. That's what you need for a good team book, is to start small and build it. Like, we haven't mentioned the Suicide Squad yet, but Ostrander, who, is one of the best in my mind, gradually built that up to the best incarnation of the Suicide Squad there has been. They've tried to bring it back, but it's just not as good. None of them have been as good as Ostrander, and he did it without Harley Quinn. I don't think she was around back then, but there are too many team books now that, like, Fraser said, hey guys, let's put on a show. Who can we get? And they just throw in people randomly. I think Nancy, were you going to go to least favorite team?
Well, we can do least favorite team. I didn't have it in mind to do, but sure, we can do that. What's your least favorite?
Batman Incorporated. It's simply, we've got all these neat Batman characters. Let's put all these people together, and instead of having them be the Batman or what have you of their particular country, it's like, we're all going to work on the menace of this story arc, and we're just gonna leave our countries behind and try to work together. To me, Batman Incorporated just doesn't work.
Okay. Does anybody else want to tag a least favorite?
I will go with the Bronze Age Champions, which was a kind of mess where you threw in Hercules, Ghost Rider, Angel, Iceman, and Black Widow on a team, but sort of multiple, from what I have read about the backstory, multiple people trying to put together a team simply because they thought it would have enough characters to sell. And it was the theme was going to be, while other heroes try to save the world and fight supervillains, we will take care of the common man. No, they wound up saving the world and fighting supervillains. They were basic. I mean, it could have been interesting with such a strange mix, but it wasn't. So, man.
I mean, that sounds like, they're trying to do Law and Order superheroes. Like, there's a Law and Order show. You don't need a superhero show of, and I mean, don't get me wrong, like, She-Hulk as a lawyer is fabulous, but that's the thing. But, but it sounds almost like what's taken over teams is, instead of teams, like, they're now just sort of hookup culture, right? Like, we'll just throw these characters together for a one-night stand and see if it works, as opposed to like here's a group that functions together. And I mean, I could see some fun in that. I don't really have any least favorite ones. None that I can think of offhand anyway.
Okay. Chris, did you want to add anything?
The X-Men, I would say, I love the Silver Age X-Men, and then the new X-Men for a while. But I don't know, then it just all becomes too much. I mean, we've all heard and read about just the excessive Chris Claremont angst and thought balloons, and I don't know. I reach a point where I'm trying to read those stories where I just have to stop. And then when they went on, where there were just so many titles and so many different versions of the team, and from time to time, I've tried to go back and pick up, and I just find all of it just impenetrable now. I know I don't know who the characters are or what they're talking about, and they're probably my least favorite team today.
Well, then let's take that and flip it on its head a little bit. And just in general, what makes a team book a good book for you? Fraser, will you start?
Oh Lord, me first. Damn. I really like, okay, interesting group of characters. Characterization is good, but even a really cool team like the early Silver Age Justice League and most Silver Age DC teams, not a lot of character, but some good stories. Cool mix of heroes, great powers. So I'm honestly not sure I can. I have like many different teams: Legion, Outsiders, Kooky Quartet, period of the Avengers, and it's just something that clicks. And I'm honestly not sure what it is, except the team just works. Sometimes like with the Legion, it's the setting. With the Outsiders, it's the characters. With the JLA, it was the cool Gardner Fox plot. So all kinds of things.
Okay. Emily?
I think there are sort of two different routes you can go. I like, and I think Fraser mentioned earlier, the found family kind of thing where you have a group of people that are coming together that fulfill needs in each other, right? That like, I think a team works not necessarily when their plot is successful, but when you see why these characters function together, right? They interact in a meaningful way on the page. So that when something that's supposed to be big and deeply moving actually might be deeply moving, like you might actually, get choked up at the end because you care about them. The other way I think it can work, and I'm going to borrow a term from romance, Nancy, is forced proximity, right? Where you take a bunch of people who are very different, but they have to be together for whatever reason, right? Like they're all stranded on a planet. They are the only ones left who can fix it. Whatever brings them together, and they wouldn't necessarily decide to spend their off time together, but they're stuck together now and sort of have to make it work. And those outside forces, I think, can build and make interesting dynamics, especially when you put together characters that have very different, not necessarily incompatible, but very different value systems, right? Very different reasons for doing what they're doing and sort of wanting to either help or not help, or how they want to help, or what their end game is. And watching them negotiate that they have to do this, they have to put aside whatever problems they have to fix things later. And it can also be a great place for comedy, right? Like this sort of, right now we're going to go kill that, but when it's done, I'm going to smack you until I feel better, right? Like those sort of moments that in the height of stuff that's very emotional and very interesting, feels like it has a personal scale and also humor in it. So that's sort of what I think builds a team. The same thing that builds good romance novels, honestly.
Chris?
I like that found family idea and the interactions between characters, but especially in modern comics today, I think what I don't see enough is stability, just in the way the characters behave and in who's on the team. I remember, I don't know, it's within the last 10 or 15 years, there was some version of The Outsiders where there was a revival. I was reading it, and I was starting to like it, and the interactions between some of the characters were very interesting. And I was starting to eagerly look forward to the next issue every time in a way that I usually don't with modern comics. And then there was a new author, and he dropped all of that and totally shook up the membership of the team. And within a couple of issues, I was bored, and the comic I was reading was just unrecognizable compared to what it had been just 2 or 3 issues earlier. And I've seen that in the fan press, where the comic press, where there's a new author coming on a team, and the first question they'll ask is, well, how are you going to shake up the membership? And I don't want to see that just if it happens naturally and it makes sense for the story and the characters, but to just shake up the membership because, hey, I'm writing this book now and I want to generate some attention, it just ruins the pacing and the story. So stability is what I would like to see.
John?
I think it's, well, the phrase found family has been used a lot, but I think it's more of a group of friends coming together. You had the feeling that the Justice League kind of hung out together when they, in their off hours. The Justice Society. The Justice League had all previous, in the original incarnation, they kind of were forced together. But, in things like Grant Morrison's great run on Justice League, they had all worked together, either to, individual team ups or, the Trinity of Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman. And it was sort of like, look, we're the best in the world. Who's else is going to look out for the world? And these people knew they were familiar with each other. They knew what each other could do. If they weren't friends, they were at least colleagues. And I think a lot of the newer books, again, getting back to Batman Incorporated, you don't get the sense that these people, they work together, but you get the sense that maybe they don't like each other, and that if it wasn't for the fact that they're in this thing called Batman Incorporated, they would never see each other again. So it's more of a difference between a high school class where they are a college class full of relative strangers versus a college sorority or fraternity where everybody knows each other and can work with each other. If the team seems to be a fraternity or sorority, or if there is a gender neutral term for the gender neutral equivalent, that's what it needs to be, rather than just okay, we're together, we have to fight together, but I really don't know you, you don't know me, I don't even know who you are under that mask.
Yeah.
And for me, that makes a bad team. Let me add one of my favorite teams that, even though it wasn't billed as at the beginning, wasn't billed as a team book, was The New Superman and the Justice League of China. I love that book.
Yes.
Well, for me, I like the feeling of people who come together for a purpose or out of a common interest. Like the Teen Titans was born because they were all sidekicks and they all knew what the sidekick gig was like. And they weren't sidekicks when they all hung out together. They were just young superheroes. And over time, they really became more of a family. And I liked the fact that the Wolfman Perez version didn't quite start that way because the mix wasn't the same. But it got back to that in the end. And at the same time, the Legion is not really, to me, found family. Some of them are found family to each other, but mostly they are comrades. And the thing that makes it work for me is you've always got each other's backs. I think it might have been Lightning Lass who said to Nemesis Kid, no Legionnaire ever stands alone. And that was one of the things that I liked about it a lot. And picking up on what John was saying about, or maybe it was Chris who just said, let's shake it up, let's shake it up and get some attention. I think that's part of what happened with the Bendis Legion. And it just was so different that a lot of long-term readers looked at it and went, no, that's not my Legion, I'm done. And so I don't think they picked up enough new readers to make up for that. And I think they changed it so much that a lot of longtime readers looked at it and went, I don't even know what this is. So it just kind of depends. We're actually pretty much out of time. Is there anything anybody wants to add before we do our final wrap up?
The Teen Titans have been mentioned several times. I just wanted to share one of my favorite, my favorite Teen Titans bit is where the Teen Titans have, gotten together and they've gone off and done this, and they're all heading, they're all heading back to whatever passes for their clubhouse. And Robin, I think that might have been Tim Drake at the time. Robin is looking at Batman and expecting him to say, come on, Robin, back to that cave. And Batman simply looks at him and goes, go be with your friends. Acknowledging basically acknowledging what the Teen Titans were, its benefit for Robin and by extension the rest of them, and indirectly mentioning there was I caught a tone in Batman's voice, even though it wasn't there. I wish I had friends back then.
Yeah, the Titan show on HBO Max was, I think, a huge example of wasted potential that they rarely capitalized on. But one thing I thought they did really well was the friendship between Dick Grayson and Donna Troy. And they showed it in flashback that Wonder Woman would come to Wayne Manor to talk to Batman about some kind of Justice League stuff, and Donna would come along and hang out with Dick. And so they established the roots of that friendship early on. And you can't do that with every group of heroes. It's not practical, but I liked that they did it. All right. Well, then I guess we will wind up. We'll go around. Please tell people where they can find information about your work or a project you have going or some new release that you would like everybody to be aware of. Chris, will you start?
I'm Chris. Again, I am not an author, which I know is strange here, but I'm okay with it. But I am the central mailer of the Interlac APA devoted to the Legion of Superheroes, and you can find us on Facebook in the group that's entitled Interlac, the Legion of Superheroes APA Facebook group.
Okay, John.
Hey, again, I'm John L. French, and you can find me through my Amazon page, or I'm on Facebook. My newest book is called The Wages of Sin. That's spelled S-Y-N. It's about Jericho Sin, aka the Scarecrow, who is basically a modern day paladin who sits in a bar called The Shadows and waits for people in trouble to come to him and help him, and he helps solve their. It's available Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and through Bold Venture Press.
Fraser?
I'm Fraser Sherman. I write historical fantasy and film reference books. I had Questionable Minds, a steampunk novel, come out last year. I will have 19 Infinity, an anthology of short historical fantasy stories, coming out this summer. You can find me at FraserSherman.com, Fraser Sherman. It's spelled funny. I also blog about comics a lot at Atomic Junk Shop.
Emily?
I'm Emily Leverett. You can find me at Emily Leverett or EmilyLavinLeverett.com. My name is pretty unique, so if you remember the Leverett, you can probably find me. I have 2 series out right now. One, The Ice Pod Chronicles, is about a modern-day woman who goes to Ferry to find her father and ends up taking a job at a Ferry university because immigration requires she be employed. The other is a romance. It's a historical romance set in the 12th century about a nun and a werewolf that hunt demons together, and is based on Marie de France, who is a real-life nun from that time period.
Okay, and you can find me here at ConTinual or on my website, nancynorthcott.com. On social media, I'm really primarily active on Twitter, which is probably not healthy, but it's a habit. And I'm at Nancy Northcott there. My latest release is The King's Champion, the concluding volume of the Board King's Honor Historical Fantasy Trilogy, which has a Richard III theme. This particular book is set in the summer of 1940. It opens with the Dunkirk evacuation and ends in the early days of the Blitz. And it has magical agents trying to protect England against Germany after the fall of Europe. So that's that. Thank you to everybody who came and joined our discussion. Thank you to everyone who's watching. And thank you to our sponsors, Heroes Aren't Hard to Find and Heroes Convention. For more information about them, visit heroesonline.com.